So the injection site in Vancouver was really founded as a collaborative effort between people in the community, drug users, and ourselves, activists in the neighborhood who were working there. And obviously with tremendous support from a whole sector of people, including academics, people who worked in health, politicians who really stuck their neck out, some who lost their careers over defending it. And the sort of activism began around 1997. And it began really because a friend of mine, Bud Osborne, who was a drug user and a poet, he was the founder of VANDU, which is the Vancouver Area Network of Drug Users, came to me one day, and Mark and I and Kirsten, who were at work, and he came into my office. He used to do a writing group at the hotel that I was running, which is where a lot of people who use drugs were living. And the hotel that we were running was really like the first place where, if you were a drug user, it was safe for you to live and be a drug user without being afraid of being evicted. So we had created this sort of radical zone, I guess, for people to be accepted. And there we learned a lot about how brutalizing the war on drugs was and what life was like for people. So Bud came to me and Mark and Kirsten one day and he said, like, this is just too much. Too many people are dying. The pain in this community, I'm getting so angry, I don't know what to do. We have to do something. And it was really one of those moments where it was just this call to action that we needed. We knew something had to change, and we knew we had to do something. But we'd just been sort of in grief crisis mode, you know? So at that point, we said, okay, yeah, you're right. We have to do something. And we started the activism, and we stuck a 50-foot banner, a red banner called The Killing Fields, and we strung it across the main intersection in our neighborhood at rush hour. And stopped traffic and handed out leaflets to people who were in cars. We marched a giant crowd to the park in our area and where we had put up 1,000 crosses that we made out of wood. And each of those 5,000 crosses represented the life of somebody who had died from a drug-related death in the last 5 years. And we called a press conference, and it was the first time really that media attention came to the community and really took a different perspective on what was going on. There was another big event that we did after that, a community conference called Out of Harm's Way. And at that we brought guests from all over Europe and the US and Canada to come together as sort of, talking heads, experts in alternative ways of looking at what we called the crisis of drugs and inner city crime. And there were no solutions, so nobody knew what to do. So we thought, well, let's look around the world and see what other people have done. And so we had this giant tent, and it was a free event in a park. And it was a cold, rainy day in November, and over 800 people came. And we had food and gospel music, and it was like this giant revival meeting. And that was the first time where people in the community heard themselves that there was a different way of thinking about what the solutions were. Because up until that point, people really only felt that people had to get into treatment or be arrested. Those were the only two narratives that really existed. So after that event in the tent, in Out of Harm's Way, the drug user group, VANDU, and us and the mayor at the time, Philip Owen, worked very actively to change the conversation in the city through a whole variety of ways of amplifying different perspectives. The perspectives of family members, the perspective of healthcare professionals. We involved churches, church leaders, and the city strategy, which was 4 pillars, was very effective because we didn't isolate people who were supportive of treatment or prevention or enforcement. We said we all need to work together, but there's this 4th pillar, harm reduction, for all the people that are being failed from these other 3 existing pillars that they haven't been caught by. So that meant that over time, representatives from treatment and enforcement and prevention all became supportive of the role that we had, because we weren't trying to do everything. We were just trying to really address people for whom other things were failing. And because there was a lot of conversation, a lot of public meetings, a lot of media, we really spent, I think, really between 1997 and 2003 when it opened, shifting public opinion at every possible opportunity. And one of the ways that we did that was looking for ways to link the story of what was happening in the downtown east side to other stories that were going on in the media, whether or not it was a health conference that was on in town, or even when the whale died at the aquarium, we made this news story about the fact that people were upset about the death of this whale, but at the same time there were all these people in the community that were dying. And so trying to always find opportunities to tell the story in the news. And then by doing that, really a conversation continued and changed and grew to the point where in 2003, in our municipal election, the mayor who came into power won a landslide victory on the issue of supervised injection. He was given a mandate by the City of Vancouver to open one very quickly. And at that point, we had massive support in the city. And we polled at 76% of the popular vote in our city supporting supervised injection. In the beginning, when we started to have this conversation in Vancouver, there was a lot of anxiety from both people who believed the only way forward was treatment, or people who were scared that by having a conversation about supervised injection, we would be enabling drug use or celebrating drug use in some way, making it easier for people to use drugs. And those fears were quickly allayed once the research came out about what the injection site was doing. Because we know that it's not a magnet, it doesn't draw people to the site. We know that it actually makes being a business owner easier in the neighborhood because you're less likely to have somebody injecting on the doorsteps of your business or overdosing in front of you. So a lot of the things people were scared of, we were able to basically bring peace of mind to folks once the research was getting funded through the federal government, once the site was open. And after a year of being open, the main opposition completely switched and became very supportive because they saw the impact the site was having in the neighborhood. But our opposition was very fierce, and at one point in the campaigning up towards opening the site, there was a march of over probably 5,000 people through the community with placards that said "No more drugs." And there was definitely people who were opposed, but we had to just continue to have the conversation and use every opportunity we could to collect signatures, provide education. We ran movie nights in cinemas where we showed this film a local filmmaker had made, and we set up tables outside where we collected signatures. It was a lot of work organizing and bringing people together and creating that dialogue, but it was very effective in the end, very strategic, and it worked to change public opinion. Our main opposition was with the federal government. The federal government, once we had been opened under the Liberal government, the government changed and became conservative after 3 years, and at that point things became more difficult. A typical intake would be a pretty straightforward conversation with somebody about what the site is for. A one-to-one conversation always takes place with somebody about their drug use history, about why they want to use the site, help them understand that the site is for them, and what the site offers in terms of equipment and also access to other supports and resources. So whether it's just basic primary care or referrals into housing and treatment. You sit down with somebody who's coming into the site and get a bit of history from them, a bit of just a conversation, the beginning of a relationship. And then from there, they create an ID code. So every time they come to the site, they just use that code when they arrive. And then they're registered into the system. And then they go through, it's sort of like a horseshoe, where they go into a waiting area, and then when a booth becomes available, they can go into a booth where they pick up clean equipment. They tell the staff at that point what they're going to use, what they're bringing into the site with them. They wash their hands, they go to a booth, they inject. There's a mirror they're sitting in front of so other people can see from behind what they're doing. So the nurses and the healthcare workers that are in the site can offer them teaching, education about how to inject safely. And then they leave the injection site when they're finished, and then they can go into a room called the chill out lounge where they can basically wait, have a cup of coffee, meet with the counselor who does referrals or the peer support workers. They can get information about methadone, housing, whatever. The people who use InSite, the vast majority are chronic drug users who've had many years of addiction under their belt. They're not typically new users. The vast majority are over 30. The vast majority are men. However, we do also have women and First Nations population who are the Indigenous population in Canada represent our most marginalized at-risk drug users. So one of the statistics about the impact on overdose deaths that InSite has had shows that 35%, we've decreased overdose deaths 35% among males who are white, but we've reduced overdose deaths among First Nations by 50%. And women by 50%. So these very marginalized at-risk groups are the ones that InSite targets the most effectively. Yes, people are given Narcan, but also oxygen. And also people get intubated. I mean, if you're not breathing, you need air. Narcan's given, so is oxygen, commonly. Well, I can tell you that every month there are between 20 and 30 overdose incidents that take place at the injection site, and that has consistently been the case for at least the last 10 years, probably since the beginning. I think in the beginning, for the first couple of years, it was closer to 10 a month, quickly moved to 20, and now it's closer to 30. There's 800 to 1,200 visits a day, depending on the time of the month. Closer to check day, more people come because they have some more money. The volume has been... Basically, the site's been at maximum capacity for the last 6 years. It cannot take any more people because there is not enough space to accommodate any more injections. Over 2 million injections have taken place there since it opened, and there's not been one death. So in terms of statistical modeling of what that means around how many lives are saved, we just know no one's died there, and it's been heavily used. It's the busiest center of any injection site in the world. Unfortunately, we're not able to test drugs at InSite. It's a limitation, and it's something that I wish we were able to have implemented when we opened, but it's controversial to test drugs. It's complicated. It's something I think in the future may be able to happen, now that there's a little bit more political support federally. One of the things, though, that I should mention about InSite that we forget, and that is that because so many people who are using drugs in the neighborhood come there, the second there's a bad batch of drugs out on the market or there's something particularly lethal out that's being sold by dealers on the street, we're able to find that out very quickly because we'll know, because 10 people will have an overdose in one night. And then we'll ask people, what are they using? And because we're asking everybody what they're using when they come in, and they're telling us because they want us to help them if they're going to overdose, that information gets quickly recycled back to the police, to the community, to the hospital. So there's these alerts that go out regularly from the injection site about what drugs are out there. So that's been a very important feedback loop. I think the injection site obviously was established to save lives, and it has done that extremely well. So the first and foremost objective was to prevent people from dying so that there would be hope to live another day. And while I think that is its core mission, and it's done that extremely well, I think that there's been something also very powerful happen with the opening of a site that's dedicated for people who are actively using drugs. And that is that it has sent this message to people who are actively addicted that their lives matter today while they are still using drugs. That they don't have to be seen as a person only if they're clean. You know, the people who use drugs that are addicted to drugs are able to have membership in society and to be seen as citizens and to have personhood. And those things are deprived of drug users. And we've made all sorts of reasons why we've justified that, mostly around notions of criminality and blame. And we've been very locked into these beliefs about blaming people, and sort of the whole personal responsibility as opposed to the social responsibility arguments around why people are in this situation in the first place. But I think over time in Vancouver, people have shifted a little bit of these beliefs and attitudes and have started to understand that you can work with people who are actively addicted. They can live in stable housing. They can find work. They can, even be contributors to society in a meaningful way in community and continue to be addicted. And that's sort of flipped people's perspective to some degree around addiction. When we first opened InSite, the application process to have an exemption from the federal criminal code was very complicated and onerous and very laden with bureaucracy. And at that time, there was no public health educational material that we could use to rationalize a inhalation room to the same degree that we could argue HIV was spread through injection needles. However, since then, we've understood more clearly that you can transmit both hepatitis and HIV through sharing crack pipes and other kinds of health issues that are more common among inhalation drug users. So the whole process of applying for an exemption needs to be gone through again in order to have an exemption for inhalation. When we built the site, we built it with the capacity for it to be an inhalation site, so the vents are in, the fans are in, everything's there. We did put in an application many years ago to the federal government, which was just ignored. But again, now that the political situation has changed, my hope is that people will continue to push for an inhalation site in Vancouver. There has been a heroin prescription trial going on in Vancouver for a while, and it's been shown to be quite successful in terms of the impact on drug users for whom particularly methadone is not working for. So it tends to be a subgroup of people who are addicted to heroin. And there are people still on that program, but it's very small. It was a trial. It's only 100 people. So again, now that the federal government has changed and the Minister of Health in particular is more receptive to these sorts of programs, my hope is that prescription heroin program will scale up. I think one of the things that was really overwhelming for me to see when the injection site opened was what it meant to the families. On the first day we opened, the midwife who delivered my child came with flowers because her own son is an injection drug user, and she used to have to drive around the alleys at night looking for him. And she came the day we opened, brought me flowers and said, "I'm so grateful because now I don't have to drive around looking for my son." And we get flowers and chocolates and cookies and letters and Christmas cards from family members all over the city who are grateful and supportive of the fact that InSite exists, because without it, families are even more terrified of what might happen to their child than they are already worrying every day. And for the families that I've met and for the parents that I know who've lost their children, to other people it may be that these are just junkies or people whose lives don't matter, but it's somebody's child. And as a mom, I can't imagine the pain it must be like to experience having lost a child to drug use. And then on top of that, they feel such shame for the fact that they used drugs and died because of the stigma that everybody else has put onto drug use. So all I can tell parents and family members and community people who are or maybe apprehensive is that it is about recognizing and respecting those relationships and giving some humanity back to those families. And the family members really feel that and and definitely benefit from it.